Let's jump right in. Think about the Hebrew Bible for a second. There is literally no figure who casts a shadow quite as massive as Moses. I mean, the guy spans 4 of the 5 books of the Torah. He's acting as a liberator, a lawgiver, a military commander, and the architect of an entire religious system. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to explore the life of a man who served as the absolute hinge of biblical history. Just think about his epitaph from the canon of Scripture. Deuteronomy tells us there has not arisen a prophet since in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. The biblical writers surveyed all of Israel's history, past Joshua, past David, past Elijah, and they still found absolutely no equal. But our goal today is to go way beyond that legendary praise. We really want to understand the gritty, deeply flawed, and profoundly intimate man behind the text. We're talking about a man of fierce anger, profound insecurity, and just devastating intimacy with God. Okay, here is our roadmap for the journey. We're going to break this down into 6 parts. First, his origins between 2 worlds. Second, his time as a reluctant prophet. Third, the cosmic contest to let his people go. Fourth, the mountain and covenant. Fifth, the weight of leadership. And finally, the view from Nebo. Section 1. Between 2 worlds. We begin our story in a world of escalating imperial terror, where an endangered birth sets the ultimate stage for a miraculous rescue. So Moses is born into an empire that is actively trying to prevent his very existence through Pharaoh's systematic death decrees. When his mother, Jochebed, could no longer hide him, she places him in a basket on the Nile River. Now, here's a really fascinating linguistic detail. The specific Hebrew word used for that vessel is thava. It's a brilliant typological connection because that word is only used twice in the entire Hebrew Bible. It's used here for Moses' basket and earlier for Noah's ark. Both of these vessels were sealed against the waters of judgment, and both carried the future of humanity's redemption as they floated right into the current of divine providence. And that river rescue resulted in a really fascinating double formation. On one hand, you have Moses raised in the Egyptian palace. He's instructed in the wisdom, the rhetoric, and the absolute power of the empire. But on the other hand, he completely retains his Hebrew identity. He knew exactly who he was. And that internal tension finally snapped one day when he witnessed an Egyptian beating a Hebrew. His passionate but honestly very premature attempt at liberation ended in a violent kill in the sand. He didn't have the wisdom or the character to actually lead yet, so his cover was blown, forcing him into a sudden, terrifying exile. Section 2. The Reluctant Prophet. This brings us to his exile in the Midian desert, which is a place of profound spiritual and psychological dissolution. Think about the timeline of Moses' life. It perfectly captures the logic of divine delay. God didn't use him when he was a powerful, highly connected 40-year-old prince. Instead, Moses spends the next 40 years in the absolute silence of the desert, learning to shepherd animals. It's out there that all the noise of human ambition just completely falls away. God deliberately bypassed the confident revolutionary to use an 80-year-old broken shepherd. That delay wasn't waste of time at all. It was absolutely essential for the formation of his character. So, at 80 years old, at Mount Horeb, Moses encounters this bush that burns, but is incredibly not consumed by the fire. When God calls his name, Moses answers with a single incredibly powerful Hebrew word, hineni. It translates to, "Here I am." It signals a terrifying but absolute readiness and presence before the divine on holy ground. God then reveals his name, I am who I am, a name that absolutely insists on sovereign freedom. But, Moses isn't that confident palace prince anymore. He actually offers 5 successive objections to God's calling. He's pleading, saying, "Oh my Lord, I am not eloquent. I am slow of speech and of tongue. Please send someone else." This is such an incredibly honest look into prophetic vocation. It reveals a devastating loss of personal confidence and just deep psychological resistance. He spent 40 years dissolving into someone who firmly believes in his own total inadequacy. And God's firm provision here is striking. He tells Moses, "Who has made man's mouth? Is it not I, the Lord? Now therefore go, and I will be with your mouth." The Creator establishes right here that he requires availability, not necessarily ability. The lesson is so clear for any of us facing an overwhelming task. God needs the person who is willing, however reluctantly, to go. Ultimately, God does angrily concede to send Moses' brother Aaron along as a spokesperson. Now, that's a concession that will later prove pretty disastrous for Israel. But the bottom line remains, God simply asks us to show up. Section 3. Let my people go. Now we move to the cosmic contest in Egypt as Moses finally returns, not as a prince, but as a prophet. We've got to understand that the 10 plagues were not merely divine parlor tricks or basic coercion. They are a systematic dismantling of Egypt's gods. And even more profoundly, they are literal reversals of creation itself. Think about it. Turning the Nile to blood reverses life-giving waters. The plague of darkness reverses God's very first spoken words in Genesis. The death of the firstborn reverses the foundational blessing of fruitfulness. God is showing Egypt exactly what a world without him actually looks like. This whole cosmic contest culminates in the Passover. And this wasn't just a meal. It was a highly structured liturgical act designed to be repeated across generations. They had to select a lamb on the 10th day, slaughter it at twilight on the 14th, apply blood to the doorposts with hyssop, and eat it roasted whole in total readiness for departure. Every precise step was a visible act of faith for the household. The blood applied wasn't for God's information. He already knew who was inside. It established the foundational typology of the Lamb, foreshadowing the ultimate exodus from sin and death. Section 4. The Mountain and Covenant. We now arrive at the law and glory at Sinai, where a group of liberated slaves is formally constituted as a brand new nation. While Moses is up on the mountain receiving the law, Israel breaks the covenant before the ink is even dry by worshiping the golden calf. And they're aided by Aaron, the very concession God made back at the burning bush. God actually offers to wipe them out and start over entirely with Moses. But look at Moses' staggering response. He says, "But now, if you will forgive their sin, but if not, please blot me out of your book that you have written." He literally offers his own existence, his own place in the covenant, to absorb God's wrath on their behalf. The psychological and theological weight of this intercession is just immense. He stands between a holy God and a sinful people, and he completely refuses to move. Following this massive crisis, God places Moses in a cleft of the rock and grants him the most intimate privilege given to any human in the Old Testament. God passes by and proclaims his own character. These are the 13 attributes of mercy. He declares himself as a God who is merciful and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love, forgiving iniquity, but who will by no means clear the guilty. Israel's theology wasn't built on philosophical abstractions, right? It was built on this exact moment, when a shepherd from Midian heard the character of the Holy One proclaimed directly to him. And this unmediated intimacy had a physical effect. Moses' face literally shone with the reflected glory of the divine presence, which honestly terrified the Israelites. He had to wear a veil when speaking to the people to cover a real but fading glory. The Apostle Paul later brilliantly illustrates this, comparing that fading glory to the transient nature of the Old Covenant itself, which would eventually be exceeded by a permanent, increasing glory. Section 5. The weight of leadership. We must now examine the grueling sociological reality of 40 years in the desert, as recorded in the book of Numbers. The wilderness years are basically a cycle of constant complaining from a people whose minds are still totally trapped in slavery. Freedom is hard, and it breaks Moses down. At one point, even his own siblings, Miriam and Aaron, publicly challenge his prophetic authority. The text describes Moses here using the Hebrew word anav, meaning the most meek, humble, or gentle man on earth. But understanding that word changes everything. It isn't weakness. True biblical meekness is extreme strength entirely surrendered to divine control. It describes one who has placed all personal claims and defenses entirely in God's hands. Moses doesn't defend himself. He lets God handle his defense, and then he immediately intercedes to heal Miriam when God strikes her with leprosy. And this brilliantly illustrates the tragic climax of Moses' leadership at the waters of Meribah. Exhausted by the people's endless complaints, God tells Moses to speak to the rock to bring forth water. Instead, Moses strikes it, shouting, "Hear now, ye rebels, shall we bring water for you out of this rock?" This combination of anger, direct disobedience, and attributing the miracle to himself rather than God permanently disqualifies Moses from entering the promised land. The mediator of the covenant was held to the covenant's absolute strictest standard in his most public moment. Section 6. The View from Nebo. This brings us to the heartbreaking summit and the ultimate death and legacy of Moses' 120-year life. God shows Moses the entirety of the Promised Land from afar, but tells him he will not enter it. For centuries, this has been read as a tragedy, but in reality, it's a profound typological disclosure. Moses was the preparation, not the destination. He mediated a covenant on stone. He was the faithful servant delivering people from physical slavery. But his deliberate limitation points forward to Jesus, the greater Joshua, who mediates a covenant on the heart, is the heir and son, and delivers us from sin and death. The promise, you see, was never just about geographic territory. John chapter 1, verse 17 says, "For the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ." In the New Testament, during the Transfiguration, Moses finally stands inside the Promised Land. But he's not standing there alone. He is standing on a mountain in glory beside Christ, the law and the fulfillment of the law standing together, proving that the work of liberation is always larger than any one man. Moses spent his life standing in the gap for a broken people. He burned with God's presence, but like the bush at Horeb, in the end, he was not consumed. So what you should take away from this is a profound challenge. Moses died outside the land so that a greater exodus could bring us in. It leaves us with a provocative final question. Are you willing to be the faithful preparation for a destination you might never get to see? Think about that for a while. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.